you're going to be getting nuts, and I think if you can get this through, my wife is running the video, so we're trying. So right here we have what you will not be getting. These are horse chestnuts, or buckeyes, and they do look a lot like American chestnut. They're dried up. They have a big white section that was light section that was where it was attached to the burr, and they generally come one or two, and a lot of times people get confused, but a few spikes, horse chestnuts. So we're looking for chestnuts, and chestnut burrs vary all the way from an American-sized chestnut burr to a small American-sized chestnut burr to a pretty good-sized one. Some of them get as big as softballs, and they tend to be European or Asian hybrids if they have large burrs. Inside the burr are 3 nuts. This one has not shed the nuts, and if you look real closely at the tip of each nut, you can see a little, well, it almost looks like a little tail. That's actually the stigma-style pistil from the female parts, and you will see that on the individual nuts you get in the male. So just keep in mind that the very tips will show. So a big nut like this tends to be European. You'll get them in the store, or twice as big. This is much more of an American chestnut size. Some are larger, but they're not very big. There's a red oak acorn I just found in the ground today, and there's a fertile American chestnut, and here is an infertile. People always wonder, well, how can you tell? The infertile have no third dimension. They're flat. They're like all the air has been sucked out of them. A fertile one has 3 dimensions to it, but they all have the remnants of the female flower on the end of them that was pollinated. So what you're going to get, and we have to go over here to the refrigerator, and things are not terribly neat here, but this is how the nuts have spent the winter. They've been in here all winter in these plastic bags or pots. Lots of thermometers. In fact, I've got 4 thermometers here, because what happens is they don't agree, and so you got to figure out which one's telling the right temperature. That says 38. This one says 32. This one says 35. And then here's one out of a laboratory, and this should be the most accurate, and that's saying just above 32. Look at the rooster. He wants to come here and try one of the chestnuts. Sorry, buddy. We all owe a big debt of gratitude to Mark Meal and his friend Dave Lent in Massachusetts, who collects most of these wild type American chestnuts. They're phenomenal. They track them down all summer, go in the fall, beat the squirrels to it, figure out how to get them out of the trees or collect them. Meticulously labeled. This first one I just happened to grab says harvested 2020, Mark Meal, Dave Lent. Custom tree identification, Mohawk tree. There are 14 nuts in here. There's an big long ID number. The address is 70 Mohawk Path, Holliston, Mass. And the coordinates. So there's the GPS coordinates. These were stored without any peat moss in them. And it's an experiment, because most everybody, they recommend you put peat moss to keep them moist. I know one person that does this who doesn't add peat moss, so this was an experiment. Most of these have spent the winter with moist peat moss in them. So we're going to grab a few of these, and I'll show you what you're going to be getting in the mail. By the way, we keep our apples in here, and they I know I've read it's best not to keep apples with chestnuts. They give off some kind of a gas that might not be great stored together. We might have to ask him to leave. Hey, buddy, go on. 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 This is our attack rooster. Okay, so I take my trusty little pan, which I'm going to grab right here, and hey, just got tapped. Okay, gonna pour them out. This isn't gonna work very well. Come on, buddy, go on. Come on, out, 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 go on. That's funny. They think they've been buried by a squirrel under the duff in the forest, and they know from however daylight temperature that it's time to start growing. A lot of these will have little roots, a radical that has started to grow down. So if I tip them over in the middle of the winter or stir them up too much, sometimes that radical will get twisted. So with luck, these will have a little radical, or, so we'll take a look here. So let's see what I can find. Now that nut right there, I would suspect maybe is not terribly wild type, because it's quite large, but an American chestnut can certainly get that large. I can feel the radical right here, but what's confusing, if you can see the little, it's like a little tiny horsetail sticking up there, the female part. Sometimes people think that's a sprout. Not at all. That's just left over. But the root, the radical, and it's confusing because we say, well, these nuts have started to sprout, but they haven't really started to sprout, because a sprout is what grows up and turns into the tree. This is the root that grows down, the radical. And the radical will often get 6, 8, 10 inches long before the sprout pokes up through the dirt. So the trick for you is to try and get that radical, the tip of it's right there, pointing down in the peat moss. Now we'll take, here's a better one. Okay, there's a good one. I don't know what's the best way. There's the radical right there. So you want to, if you planted the nut in the pots with this pointed up, it takes quite a while for the geotropic hormones to tell the root to make a U-turn and head down, and sometimes it brings the nut out of the ground, and sometimes you get a very weird root system. So you always want to get that radical pointing down, whatever it takes. Sometimes you'll plant the nut upside down because the radical's already started to head this way. But most of the time, when in doubt, plant them on their side. So here we have 1, 2, and well, let's plant these 2. Here are the different pots, big to small. These are what we call Stewie pots. It's the company that makes them. A lot of people make them, but they're root growing, they're air pruning pots. The idea being the roots come down, they hit a lot of air, it dries out, and the roots go whoops, and they circle rather than trying to grow out through and down into the whatever your pot is sitting on. So what we use is the middle size right here. This holds 0.6 of a gallon of peat moss. One of the troubles is they don't want to stand upright. So we buy these pots that hold 9 of them quite handily. It holds 9 of them. I'll show you upstairs. What I recommend you do, for those of you that are getting pots in the mail with seeds, is that you go to the hardware store, Home Depot, wherever, and get a milk carton. You can get them for this is a real milk carton, from Rutland, Vermont. All right, that's where our second GCO is going in. Get one of these pots, pot holders. There'll be 9 of them. Here's a bucket of moist peat moss. So gets a little confusing because we're going to use the pure straight peat moss. I'm going to use that to ship the nuts to you. We're going to use growing mix, which is mostly peat moss, but with the white perlite and vermiculite mixed in. It comes powder dry, even though these bales are heavy. This bale here I just picked up yesterday. They're $36. but it makes a lot by the time you add water. I cut the bale in half, I put it in this bucket, I chop it up with a flat shovel, but a spade works fine too. This is awfully good because you can get it all stirred up. It takes a whole 5 gallons of water. Whole 5 gallons of water. I happen to use hot water because we have an outdoor shower right there. It takes 5 gallons of water to get half of this bale wet. There's no real secret to it. You just want it so when you squeeze it, the water doesn't come out, but you can definitely feel the water coming out between your fingers. You don't want it too wet. In this case, it doesn't really matter because we're going to be putting the nut in, taking it upstairs, filling it full of water, and putting them in the sunlight to grow. So, take one of these, you fill it up. I used to pack the soil in. You're a trained chicken. I just tap it down, and I like to leave 1.5 inches on top. I'll show you why afterwards. Don't fill it too full. Tap it down, sometimes tap it on the ground. That's a little, right about there. Then, I'm going to take the nuts, or you're going to take the nuts that you get in the mail. This is the one with a nice radical pointing down. Very simply, just make a little hole with your finger, or you can just stick it on top. You want it to end up at the depth a squirrel would put it, whatever that is in there. I'm sure it's not always the same. This one, if I can feel that radical pointing that way, so I'm going to point it up, lay it on its side, lay it there, and then I'm going to put a little soil on top. Some people don't do that, you just poke it down in the ground further. And then I just give it a little pat, and that is it. It is simple. Remember, these nuts really want to grow. This is just packed full of food. That's why every animal in the world, in the forest, wants a chestnut, and why you have to be so careful, because even these chickens would dig them up. A chipmunk, a squirrel, a turkey, a crow, a bear, a deer, everybody will eat chestnuts. There's a lot of food in there. I have done this in the past. I've taken some, and I put it right here. I've taken some, oh, that's funny. There, right here. This is just to make an example. Pure beach sand, washed sand, 100% pure sand. You fill a pot with sand. You take your chestnut, put it in the sand, and water it. That will grow fine. It will grow about this tall, 6, 8 leaves, using up the sugars and the food that's in the nut. I've grown them in pure sawdust. There's a bag of sawdust for the chickens there. It'll grow in sawdust. It'll grow in sand. They're not that fussy. They want to grow. There are plenty of things you can do that will make them not grow well, but remember, they want to grow. If you take an elm seed, I had one here, it looks like a little piece of oatmeal. Well, it grows into as big a tree as a chestnut, but there's very little food in that seed. So things have to be exactly right where it falls. And it has to get the right amount of moisture and the right amount of sun and start making photosynthesis right away. Not so with a chestnut. They've got all kinds of reserves in them. So, let's see, what else do I need to cover? Okay, here's what you're going to get in the mail. This is real tree mail. I like that. You have tree mail. We'll see. I mean, this is first year. I've taken, I'll send you, depending on how many nuts we can send to each person, we have 30 people that want them, and we have about 250 nuts, and we have to save some for other uses. But I'll send you 6 or 8 or 9 of these stewie pots. I do this exactly like this. I will take the plastic bag, I will put peat moss, not that the growing medium wouldn't work, but I take peat moss that I've done the same thing, added moisture to. And then I take your 6 or 8 chestnuts and put them in. I'll be a little more careful for the actual one. Try and make sure they're down in there. I put it in the pot. Whoops. I put it in the two beauties of this. It will very well insulate between the bubble wrap and the peat moss and the layers of air in this. I think it could sit outside for a good long time and not freeze. I do that. I put tape over it, tape it up. I took it down to the post office and I said, would you actually mail these? And they said, sure. I'm not even putting a return address. My wife, Sue, carefully made up all the mailing labels, and if you gave me the right address, then it'll get to you. Be in the mail Monday morning. You should get them Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, who knows. If things go wrong, if they freeze, let me know, and we ought to be able to replace them. That's the beauty of these wild type chestnuts. They're not terribly precious. So, see if there's anything else that I forgot I was going to say here. I think I'll get this in the mail, in the email to you all, so that you can be thinking. Now, if you're going to make your own pots, the only thing you really have to be careful of is to make sure you have good holes in the bottom. So if you're using what's recommended, 2-quart milk containers, somebody said I'm going to use Pringle cans. I think a Pringle can this big around isn't the best choice, even though this is what many chestnuts are grown on, these little bullet tubes, and they do okay. It's just that they dry out quickly. I don't think it's a great route to go for if you're only growing a few chestnuts. So you can get a pot like this. Well, right here, let me just grab it. You can get a pot like this at your hardware store or feed store for about, they're pretty cheap. You can get them for sometimes 30 cents each. And they're not bad, but I'll show you in the next video, that root, the root, is going to grow all the way down to the bottom of the pot before anything comes out of the ground. It's almost bizarre when you actually see it. Here's a couple of examples of why you want to get your root growing well. There's the root system of a chestnut from our nursery that I cut off, shook the soil off. You can see the original potting material in here. It's a pretty good root system with actually a taproot that's coming down. Here's a poor thing, and I'm not sure how this happened. This thing got totally root bound. I almost think it was maybe a throwaway that just kept growing. Very hard to kill a chestnut. I sawed it off, and a month later, or two, up come the sprouts. You can run over a chestnut with your lawnmower and they will re-sprout. They really want to grow. But these roots have circled and circled, and if you gave it enough sunlight, it would probably do fine. Remember, in the woods, 1 out of 1,000,000 nuts actually makes it to be a mature tree, and we're trying to get every one of our nuts to grow. Here's another tree. There's a nice 3-year-old tree, well labeled, nice center stem, and you can see right here, died of the blight. The blight circled it, killed it, but the reason I saved it was it's got a pretty good taproot. That's a pretty good root system on that tree right there, so that's really what you're going for, minus the blight. Okay, I'm sure I'll think of things afterwards, but just as a reminder, here is all the detail that went into the nuts that you're going to be receiving. There's 18 different separate mother trees, a few in New Hampshire, Vermont, mostly from Massachusetts. I'm not sending you the provenance of these nuts. Maybe next year if people get good at it and like to do it. But right now I'm just going to mix and match and try and make sure that I've got some good looking nuts in each bag. They're wild type. They will get the blight someday. It might be after we're long gone. I have one in my side yard here that's 25 or 30 years old. It's beautiful. I've got some that are only 6 years old that have gotten the blight. the younger they are, the more they tend to grow. They without getting the blight. Their bark doesn't have as many cracks, the spores don't get in. So if you get your tree growing happily, and we'll talk about that in another video, you can expect to get a lot of enjoyment out of watching it grow and getting good at it. So good luck. Hope you get your mail. If you haven't had anything by Thursday or Friday, I'm actually not going to be around after next Saturday for a while. I'm going somewhere. But if you don't get it, then let me know and I'll figure something out. Me again. I forgot to mention this. I did receive some nuts in the mail that had come from further south of here recently, and they have a long radicles. If some of yours have long radicals, here's what it's going to look like. These have been in this position, and so here's one of the nuts right on the surface, and look how long that radical is. That's not unusual to have a radical that's a good 2 inches long. So it's pretty easy, just poke your finger, and you don't want to jam this down. You don't want to break that tip. That's the end of the, that's probably the end of things if you break the tip on that. So you will you will take the finger, poke a hole down in there, set it carefully down in, firm it up a little bit from the sides. And the other thing I forgot to show you was, and I don't need to go upstairs, I simply take my sprayer from the kitchen faucet, or you can take a garden hose sprayer, and I spray it, and what it does is it stirs all this potting soil up and kind of allows it to settle, and it gives it a really good watering. The extra water comes out the bottom, and you don't really need to water that chestnut until after it's up. So the root will have grown all the way to the bottom, and then it will break through the top, and you will know if you're in a really sunny window and it looks powder dry on top, water it. Some people say you have to be careful not to overwater, but this type of a soil mixture, and I'm not sure if I exactly showed, but this Pro Mix, which you can get at pretty much any garden store, it's got mycorrhiza in it for an extra $3. I get it. I'm not sure it makes any difference. If you take a picture of the potting mix, there's your Miracle Grow. There's the Easy Root. You just get a bag of that pretty cheap at any Home Depot, Walmart, everybody. Hardware store has the potting mix. That particular one is moisture control, so it stays moister. You might have to be a little more careful about not overwatering, but it also means that you don't have to be as careful about letting it dry out. That's the quick and easy route, and if you're only growing 6 or 8 chestnuts, that's fine too. Fill it up with water, set it, it can be in the dark. You just want to put it in a warm place. Not terribly warm, but you're trying to imitate the sun hitting the soil in April or May. So you're getting a 2-month jump on the growing season. Once the tree's leafed out, you cannot plant them outside till after frost. If you take that nut that you receive in the mail and put it in your garden pretty much any time now, as long as the ground is thawed and we don't get a super heavy freeze, even if it snowed out, it wouldn't hurt. If you put that nut down 1.5 inches or 2, maybe put a little hay on top of it, it will sprout and grow fine. You can do that now, but once they've leafed out, you can't plant them outside until after the danger of frost, beginning of June generally. So, hope that helps. So, one more thing. I wanted to show you the setup here upstairs in a south-facing window of about 110 or so individually potted nuts. Each one is labeled. That is from outside of Burlington, Vermont, and that is from Kurt Laffin, our vice president. Hand pollinated, these from southern New Hampshire. There is from Wilton, New Hampshire, from a nice volunteer that drove some seedlings up last year and gave us some more nuts. These pots in the front, let's see if I can do this. The pots in the front are larger, they're 6 And the ones in the back are what I'm sending you. There are 9. That's 0.6 gallon. This is actually 1.3 gallons, I believe, each one. And if you look closely, they're starting to germinate, bending toward the light. I love the way they come up. There's just they push the soil. You'll see the soil start, and then there it is. There's that little sprout trying to poke its way out. Here's a really little one. I'm always surprised how long they take to come up. These are taking 3, sometimes 4 weeks. These poor little guys are some really precious ones from a wild, it was actually I think the Vermont, New Hampshire state champion for size, and 2 of them self-pollinating. Used to be unblighted, might have blight now. And they're not doing very well. They just, the nuts were on the ground too long and they had mold on them, but they might make it. When you start seeing the soil look real dry like that, then I'll give them a good watering. There's one just starting to leaf out. I'll have to spin them, and I'll actually take the ones closest to the light and switch with these other pots. And one of the beauties here is that I can lower that Venetian blind, the slatted blind, and block off the sunlight. You can kill your plants by letting them get cooked in the afternoon sun if you have a nice south-facing window. Theoretically, you don't even need artificial light if you have a lot of light. This wouldn't be enough, but if you have like a sunroom with a couple of glass sliding doors, we have these LED lights, which I set for about 12 hours a day. Not yet, not till, well, I'll turn them on probably in a few days or a week or something, when these things start needing some more artificial light. I don't know if you can see it from here, but out there we're looking at a bunch of chestnuts. There's the biggest one is right to the left of that little sleeping cabin, and then that's the nursery out there with probably 40 chestnuts. And then out here is another nursery with each one of those little poles sticking up is a chestnut that have made it through the winter, and they'll be taking off. There's that tree right there is a real nice one just to the left of that 4x4 post. That's a real nice chestnut, probably 6 or 7 years old. The other thing I wanted to mention was that when your nuts come in the mail and you're not ready to plant, if you're not ready to plant them, you can stick them right as is into the refrigerator. Just make sure if it's below freezing, there's something wrong with your refrigerator. But put them in the crisper drawer, anywhere in your refrigerator. They'll be fine for a few days, a week. They'd probably be fine in a month. You might have a radical that's 6 inches long, which makes them very hard to plant and not very healthy at that point. But the whole idea is you get a jump on the season. So you should plant these pretty soon after receiving them. Looking right out at just this side of the sleeping cabin is another nice chestnut that didn't lose its leaves. It's funny. It looks like a beech tree. They don't always lose their leaves. So we'll follow up with some more tips here as they start getting bigger. If you do have questions, send them in an email, but I do have probably a limited ability to answer individual questions, and so I've tried to cover as much as possible. See you later. So I wanted to show you a few things. Here are the nuts that I've planted from probably 10 or 15 different sources. You can see, if you take a look right here, it's odd that by far the nicest looking tree of all of these, just by chance I looked here, and it says on the edge, it says Odell, 1 nut. I've been following the mother tree for probably 4 years. There is a second tree nearby. I've never found a fertile nut. And I found not only 1 burr, but 1 nut. 1 nut total from watching this tree, and it's the most vigorous one. That's kind of exciting. What I wanted to show you first is, and you're you won't need to do this for a little while, but watering the trees. So here's how simple it is. I just, see where I left off here. Okay, right here. I simply take a watering can and I just put probably a good half an inch in, like they've had a good spring rain, and then I just move from one to the next. And I think if I had to do it over next year, I might try something with a little moisture control. These do dry out pretty fast. The peat moss doesn't hold a lot of moisture. And once they are transpiring, sometimes you have to water them every 4 or 5 days. So I basically go by when the soil on the top is looking real dry, give them a good water. Okay, now what I wanted to show you, and which one was I going to do? Rumney number 2. Oh, I guess I was going to do one of these right here. This is, okay, Hope had sent me these. So these happen to be in a bigger pot than you got. These are the next size up. But if you can see that the little, in the light here, a little hard to see that little tree just came out of the ground probably, I don't know, 2 days ago. So here we go. See how it works. I'm going to take my knife and I'm going to slit the pot right open. Slit it right open. One side, 2 sides. I'm going to pull it apart. And so you can come over here. There's a little side root growing. And whoops. And if I'm not mistaken, when this comes apart, see that main taproot heading straight down? It's all the way to the end of the pot trying to get out the bottom when this is out an inch. So this is 10 or 11 inches. There it is, the little tiny rootlets on the side. I kind of hate to disturb it any more than that because this will recover. So I'm just going to close it right back up and I'm going to stick it, well, hadn't planned to do that, but I'm going to stick it in another pot, and that thing will do absolutely fine. It will recover. This tree right here, I had done the same thing to a week ago when Tom Estel was over. Tom was picking up seeds and nuts for the GCO in Rutland, Vermont, and I dumped it out and it was completely bare rooted. I picked it right up, laid it back in the peat moss, enclosed it, thought, well, that might not live, and it's doing fine. It's doing absolutely fine. So these guys are rugged. I think that's what I wanted to cover right now.
I mean, they will not be cutting their pots open. You just
you won't be cutting your pots
right,
open.
well, I just...
Okay, yeah. But if you had 8 nuts and you only want to grow 4 or 5, you're welcome to take a look. But no, you generally don't cut them open. But right. It can be done. Just showing you to be patient. Sometimes it takes 2.5, 3 weeks to come out of the ground. Sometimes they're up in 10 or 12 days. So good luck. Let me know how it goes. Bye. Good morning. March 28th. I'm just back from being away for a week, and my wife watered and turned the lights on and off on the seedlings, and I thought I'd give an update. So here we are. The light is coming in nicely, so it shows the leaves well. For some reason I said this was a south-facing window. I realized it's an east-facing window, so I get, nope, it's a west-facing window, so I get the afternoon sun. Big variety in who's sprouted and who hasn't, and that's what I wanted to talk about a little bit. If you look at this one, so here we have Rumney number 2. There was some mold on it. I suspected they wouldn't do well. The burrs had opened, fallen on the ground. I didn't even find them for a couple of weeks, and apparently they had dried out and got mold on them. So if we're lucky, we're going to have 1 survivor out of those 9. These little ones that look like this generally don't make it. It's hardly worth trying. Here is another one of the same group. So we have a couple of little ones that might make it, and they might not. There's one that certainly hasn't made it. Now we come to, these are some that Mark Meal had collected in Windham, Massachusetts, planted March 6th, and they're looking great. All bending heavily toward the light. In fact, by this afternoon, they will have bent even more to the light. It's amazing. If I turn the whole plant pot around with the 9 pots in it, they'll have made 180 and bent toward the light just in one day, how quickly they can bend. Some people wonder the reddish color of the leaves. I think that's actually a great sign. That's newly developing, fast-growing leaves tend to have that nice red color to them. Here's a pot that came from Hope Yandel in Vermont, and these are some pretty special nuts that she'd sent, and they're doing very well. They're growing very well. This would be, well, I haven't got the pot. I now realize as I turn the pots around so that the plants face the light properly, I need to put labels on all 4 sides. But there's the biggest, well, not the biggest, but there's very nicely growing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, just going on 8 leaves. Here are 2 more pots that I'm shipping out. I hadn't shown any in the video, so just for the record, there's one going to Marley Rabinowitz in Guilford, Vermont, and one going to Mary Frund in Nashua, New Hampshire. They do have kind of long radicals, maybe an inch long, which makes it a little more tricky. Just make sure when you receive them to get the tip of the radical pointing down. That's the most important thing. There's some of the plants that are growing in the big containers. In fact, there's one they're doing very nicely. Now, I don't know if you can see the plant shaking. Actually, what happens is I have a mini split mounted on the wall, and when that fan goes on, I actually notice it's enough of a movement to make the leaves shake a little. And apparently it's real helpful to have some movement to the stems. The hormones or whatever react to the back and forth of the stem to toughen it up and make it stronger. If you have no wind of any kind on your seedlings, they tend to grow maybe too tall and too straight without a very strong main stem, and then when you transplant them out into windy environments, they don't do well. So last year I had my plants next to a window that I could open, and that seemed to get plenty of movement on the leaves. I don't know if you guys, well, today's Monday, and we're having really strong winds out there today. My next video, I'll go out and we'll take a look at what the outside plants are doing. But anyways, you can take a fan like this. That was from the hardware store. I think it was $25 or something. And turn it on and get the leaves moving. And this oscillates back and forth. And I don't know if you can see, but those leaves pretty quickly, that might be a little more like a hurricane, but you can figure it out so the leaves do move. And I think that's a good idea to do it a couple hours a day, some kind of a house fan, pretty much anything to get them moving, or open the window. Okay, lights. That's part of the fun of this, is the trial and error. I've moved those lights as high as they can go. Now that I think about it, each of the LED lights is 2,000 watts, so that's 2,000 watt light bulbs. That seems like an awful lot, and I think last year I probably way over lighted the plants. I would keep it on 12 hours a day, and being closer to the plants, I've now raised it up quite high and really just turn it on manually a couple times. During the day for maybe I would say between 4 and 8 hours is probably good. Now, if you're getting good sunlight, you can certainly cut back on that. But these LEDs give an awfully funny color. But, so between keeping them watered, and I don't know, you can't really tell, but these are moist to the touch, so that's good. And having some air movement on them and giving them some light. That's about all they need. Pretty quick. In fact, probably the next video I will start fertilizing these with liquid fertilizer. Not yet. They don't seem to need it. They're still drawing on the reserves in the chestnut itself. This one down on the bottom, I have experimented with. I put in one of the Miracle Grow with moisture control, and I suspect in the future I might find, well, we'll see. But right now these are just the regular old inexpensive growing medium that's mostly peat moss and then a little vermiculite and perlite mixed in. So, good luck, and we'll talk later. So, here we are, April 18. Had an inch of snow a few days ago, but it's pretty nice right now. Big variety of stuff going on here. Here's a whole bunch of pots that were basically given up as surplus last fall, stored by my nephew on the side of his garage, covered with snow, water dripping off the eaves. Would have thought they'd be toast, and I think they're all alive. I don't know, it's a little hard to see, but they've got buds on them that are pretty good. And these are from well, these are from the Plymouth times Rumney, hand pollinated. A lot of them are from Maine. They will be available for people this year. And looking out into the nursery, it's a little hard to see right now. Actually, I'm looking into the sun. So here's a tree. So I take my sheetrock buckets, cut a 3-foot long, 3-foot wide piece of burlap. This one I just dug up. That's from Kennebunk, Maine. These are the 3 nice big ones that were fruiting last year. They've been growing there too close together, but I'd like to move them now. There's a bunch that overwintered, and I'm in the there's an egg from the process of digging 8 trees up for Kurt Laffin, our vice president, to come get for educational plantings down his way. And these tubes are my experiment with the tubes. I actually personally don't happen to like them, but they do work for keeping deer away. There's no deer pressure where this is, right in town. It's ideal. I do have a fence around it, but don't need it. No deer here. So what I wanted to show was this one. So there's the bucket laying on its side with the burlap all ready for me to stick the shovel in, and I wasn't going to film this one, but it is pretty unusual to be able to. I dug it out, and if you can see there's about 12-inch taproot, which usually would get broken when I dig it, and whether it will survive the transplant. And one good example of how hard it is, sort of, to transplant chestnuts because they do have a taproot. I think they'll do fine. I'm going to show some more being dug up in a minute, but I wanted to show that taproot while it was available. So here we are, April 18th, taking a look at the chestnut starts and how they're doing. One of the beauties of having the lights, I turn them on between, I don't know, 4 and 8 hours a day, but every so often I skip a day, just trying to make it seem a little bit like out in nature where it's not going to be bright sun every day. I do think I've overstimulated them with too much light in the past. But one of the beauties of an overhead light is it keeps them growing straight. I don't have to turn them very often. If I didn't turn the lights on, within a couple of days they would all be bending fairly heavily toward that west setting, the setting sun in the west from that window. So it does work well to have the lights on, and every so often I'll turn the boxes 180 degrees, shift them around a little bit. There's a big variety in how they're doing. Some are doing real well, and some aren't. There's one of the ones where those poor little guys aren't going to make it. They keep trying. Once in a while they'll make it. From the same batch, that one did make it. That was actually a very precious batch, so even having one that made it was a good sign. The pencil there is telling me that I'm experimenting with Miracle Grow. in these containers to see if I really do have to water them and fertilize them less. If you really don't have to water or fertilize them, then that's pretty good. These are the ones from Windham, New Hampshire. This is a new line, so it's kind of good. We'll get these into some of the GCOs. I believe this was Mark Meal's find, and I'm quite sure it's the first time those nuts have been harvested. These here, which were from Kurt, are the biggest ones. There's a real big one there. I don't know, a little hard to see, but boy, that guy's really growing. A little concerned when the leaves are that yellow, whether there's something wrong, but the ones beside it look pretty good. This one's actually started to branch. You know, it's got 2 branches here with buds on the end of it. So, going outside, oh, actually I was going to show you, here's what, I think I showed you the other day, but here's what it looks like with a good strong fan on it. It really moves those leaves around. I would leave that on maybe, I don't know, a couple hours or more every few days. I usually forget, but when I turn them on, I think it's serving the purpose. I'll shift it around so they're not all blowing exactly from, the wind isn't coming from exactly the same. I can put this down, all of a sudden get the other ones moving so they all have a chance that, and I do think it does a good job. Going outside, these are some late pots. This is pretty late to be potting them, but certainly the nuts are good. Looking over here at the nursery, I'm going to have my Sue hold and show digging up another one of those. We've already done one, we'll do another one. Okay, so here we are potting some nuts very late. It's April 18th, and this is one of the bags that Mark Meal sent. These are from Moose Hill Road in Sharon, Mass. And if you can get a close-up of this, Sue, these guys are going to have some pretty big roots on them. You can see those are certainly still plantable, no question. In fact, they're fine. So once again, just a little hole, get that tip pointing down without breaking it, carefully back cover it. I'll put a little bit more over this afterwards. Now here's one. How do you get that pointing down? Do you do it like that, or do you do it like that? So I'll probably split the difference. And in fact, there's an old nut that didn't make it. So there's one that started to grow, has a little root system. And I will talk later about how you want to get that nut off of there before you put your plants outside, or be very careful. A squirrel or chipmunk will dig that plant up and usually kill it while they're getting that nut off. So you take the nut here, carefully get the point down, cover it up. I always have to remember which ones I've done those 2. There's one that's gotten a little longer than you'd like. It certainly is growable, but I'll take that one. It's a little more straightforward. That actually needs a little bit more peat moss in it. Stick that down in there, give a little tap, throw a little bit more on. So I've done those 2. Can't remember, did I do that one? No. Okay, so I'll fill these up, carefully label them. I have learned you want to put metal tags on them for sure. I'll get all of these metal tagged so that, whoops, I did plant that one. Poor guy, sorry. So, going to go over here and dig one up in the nursery. So, cut off a 2.5 or 3 foot piece of burlap. You do want to use the kind of burlap that's biodegradable. You don't want to use treated burlap. The beauty is that you could just leave the burlap on when you plant it if you want. You don't have to, but I think it's a good idea to. So this says right there, all-purpose, natural fiber, biodegradable. This was wide by 24 foot long piece of burlap. It's not very expensive, so you take one of those, you take your bucket. For ease of accessibility, let's dig this one right here up. That's a nice, well, that's unusual. Huh. I was so pleased that I had everybody tagged. They're all tagged around here. This one either fell off or, well, I didn't tag it. So we're still going to dig that one up. I'll tag it as a wild type. Pretty much all, in fact, all of these except for 5 or 6 B3 F3s on the other end. These are all wild type, but most of them are tagged. Pretty nice. This is, well, Gage Road in Wilton, New Hampshire. 2017, that's the year the nut was harvested. So it grew 1819 and then 1920. Huh. Well, this thing had a hard life. If that's actually 3 years old, I would have guessed this is going on its 3rd year. So, gonna get my shovels. Nothing wrong with a regular old spade. I did put it on the grinder this morning. Just put it in the vise and take the grinder and put a pretty good sharp edge. You could do some real damage if you hit your toe on the way down, especially if you're barefoot. This is actual transplant planting, which comes in handy for getting deep roots. And then this is kind of a pretty stainless steel one from England, which seems to be the one I like. So I'm going to go around, and with a sharp edge, I can hear that cutting through all the roots. So you're hoping, the reason you're doing it now when it's dormant is you're hoping that it'll recover fine. They don't all, but usually they do. So you go a little bit in, all the way around, and then you try and save that taproot. So you loosen it up. That taproot's still holding on. It's hard to get deep enough. Okay, there we go. So now I just get the burlap here, tip this out as a unit. Let's see, have we got I don't see a, whoops. Okay, so I'm just going to slide that right down in like that. Pretty simple. Then you just tuck this in, and that thing's good to go. You can lift it out in one piece, set it in your pre-dug hole. You can leave the burlap on. If you do, you'd want to take scissors and cut off the top. But one of the beauties is that if you try and get it out of that burlap and the dirt falls apart, you've set it way back. Unfortunately, there's the taproot I left behind. So that was coming out of the bottom. It's pretty tough on these things, but they will usually make it. Okay, I see we have a, so hello, like a term paper. I put it off the last minute. I'm supposed to go over to Maine tomorrow to help build a fence around the GCO, and won't be around for a few days, and I promised I'd get this video out. So where a couple of questions that came from you growers. Do you want to plant them in pairs? And the answer is yes, sort of. Nothing wrong with a single chestnut tree, but it won't have any chance of having edible fruit or plantable fruit, viable fruit. They have to have 2 to cross-pollinate. Even though each tree is male and female, they won't self-pollinate. So yeah, if, you know, the safety thing would be to plant 3 within 50 or 100 feet. You want to get them at least 30 feet apart or 20 feet apart. It's all a big experiment. In other words, we're looking at an orchard here that's got 30 trees. They're 10 to 12 feet apart in each direction, with the hope that they flower, they stay healthy, they flower, we can reach them from a stepladder. They're being used for future pollination and not to look at a nice chestnut orchard. Remember, anything you plant is going to get blight. You just have to get used to that. It's just the way it is. Some of them will grow real big. There's I think I've shown you some. There's some pretty beautiful trees right here that are 8, 10 years old. One of them's 20 years old, and then I've got some that are 3 years old with blight. You never quite know where it's going to show up, but this is all a step toward hopefully coming up with a blight-resistant tree. So yeah, if you think they're going to live long enough, and you're going to live long enough for them to have fruit, I mean, if they're real happy, they'll flower in 4 to 5 years, maybe even 3 if you're lucky, 4 to 5, more likely 6 to 7. In the woods, they probably don't often flower until they're 30 or 40 or 50 years old because they're waiting for a spot to grow in. Can you put them in a bigger pot? I've got the size pots you guys used right here. You could grow them in a 5-gallon bucket all summer. You know, you can experiment, do anything you want. You can make them into a patio. They'll be a nice tree to look at and talk with and get people interested. So you can up pot them into a pot with holes in the bottom so they'll drain. These are the bigger size pots, which I've actually never used before. It was an experiment this year. The thing I like about them, they'll stand upright. These things, you can't stand them upright. They tip over. And should you prune side leaves? A couple people asked that, and the answer would be no. This one, the other one we're going to plant in a minute, does have side branches coming off of it. No, you don't want to, probably better not to prune a tree at all. Even when they're growing, I think it's better not to. You're opening up wounds that can have blight in them, and they kind of know what they want. So this is a pretty good looking tree. Where to plant? Where to plant? I like it. One of my tree growing, he's actually a horticulturalist. He said they had a guest speaker, and they said, somebody said, what's the best soil to plant a tree? And he said, northern glacial mineral soil, which is what we got. So as long as it's not wet, the most important thing, just get used to using a shovel. Like right here, if you take a scoop and you look underneath, flip it over and you look underneath, and that's still nice and dark down there, and the roots are down in there, that's great. A tree will be very happy. I can go right down there, and 3 inches down, it's very sandy. So I dig a bigger hole and put some soil in it. So we're going to plant one right here. So if you're planting out in your lawn, remember, sunlight is the most important. Well, soil is the most important, and sunlight. Full sun. If you want to have a good tree, you got to give them full sun. Start with you should have a sharp shovel. It doesn't need to be super sharp. This one's actually gotten pretty dull. But I put it in a vise and take a hand file to it, or an electric grinder. It really does help a lot. So you're going to strip off the topsoil, go around, make a circle. This is real easy. Sometimes it's real hard digging. You know, if you have good grass, this is not very good grass. And then you come in from the side and you can kind of just peel off the top, set it aside for future use. So this soil is good. It's not super dark black, but there's plenty of organic matter there. So you're going to dig yourself, pretty nice when you don't hit rocks, dig yourself a hole. It's got to be deep enough, so you take your pot. We're going to plant this one here, and this is, and here's the other thing I want to make sure you know. You want to put a tag on them. Actually, it's not as important because yours are generic wild type trees. These are all known pedigrees. So this one is Tro Road times Hospice North. So our vice president there, Kurt Laffin, hand pollinated, took pollen from, the first one is always the mother tree, the female flowers. So he went to Hospice North, cut off some catkins in about beginning of July, and artificially pollinated, put a bag over it, and harvested the nuts. So this is a known cross. And these tags are wonderful. I feel like I'm a salesperson for them, but this particular tag, I can, what the heck, I put them right here somewhere. But anyways, this particular tag lasts. It doesn't corrode in the soil. I put them on with zip ties. They come with little metal wire ties. I don't like them at all, but I love these little, just a little zip tie. You got to remember as the tree grows to put a bigger zip tie on, get it up on a side branch. So this is It's just about deep enough. And this is such good soil, I'm not going to worry too much. It doesn't need to be much bigger than that. Loosen it up a little, take a little more out. And I do this, some people think it's cheating. I give them a little sugar water, which is just regular old 10-10-10 fertilizer, very cheap at the hardware store. You don't need to get anything fancy. I always put a handful or two in, and then you want to make sure that the roots aren't touching it, so you dig it in well, stir it up from the edges. If you have poor soil and you're adding soil, you do want to have a little bigger hole because you don't want to have the bathtub effect where the roots hit the poor soil and start circling. So I'm not seeing any fertilizer there, so we're good to go. Take a little bit out, check the depth. You always want to treat a little, well, you'll see. I'm going to build a mound around it for easy watering. You don't want to really get it any deeper than where it originally was. So here's the trick to these things. You got to do a really strong shake. If you try and gently shake it out, I mean, you can cut it out, cut the pot apart, but if you do a gentle shake, sometimes it falls apart. Usually, we'll see, strong shake, it comes out in one piece. There's enough roots there. It's not going to do great here. But here's the trick, is to not losing that root ball. So see the taproot all the way at the bottom, right there? There's the taproot, there's the little ones. If I let go, you set that tree way, way back. That's why you often want to have a second person. So I'm going to tip this over. I've done it enough. I didn't lose. I actually didn't do that very well, but these things are pretty resilient. So back that in. I'm going to pull it up a little. So I want to get that ground level. That's good. And drag everything in. I'm still holding that thing, and then you let it go, and there you go. So you firm it up. You don't want to jump on it, but you do want to get the air pockets out. So you firm it up. Don't jam right at the pot. Make sure that that label is where you'll see it in the future. Now what I do is I like to take the top and make my barricade, the dam. There's an earthworm, like I was telling you, invasive species. There you go. So you make on the downhill side, build that dam, just think, okay, when you fill it with water, I don't need to bake it up here. So that's going to hold a goodly amount of water. Now here's what I like to do. I take this stuff here. This is weed control fabric, heavy duty, pretty cheap. You get it at the hardware store. I really like the permeable stuff much better than plastic. It's really Tyvek. You can blow right through it. So when it rains, it's pretty natural. The water goes down, and so you fold it in quarters, and you take your scissors, which are right here, and you cut off a semicircle, and presto, just like a magician, set it over it. And what this will do is this will keep the roots from, the weeds from coming up. Now, the secret sauce, wood chips, they're wonderful. You take wood chips and you build your mound around it. Once it's down, you can, you don't need this fabric. It's fine without it, but it just means for less weeding. So then, put a big dose of it right here. And cover it all up. Won't even know it's there until the silly chickens come and uncover it. That's one problem here. They keep coming and scraping off my wood chips, but if you don't have chickens. Okay. So there you go. You got a wonderful little well for the water. If it's blowy, I actually will often take these chips and push right against it, and it'll help it, instead of having to put a little stake down in. Now this is what you want to be careful. That kind of a wind will set this plant way back, maybe even kill it. Forgot to talk about timing. This is too early. Southern New Hampshire, southern Vermont, you can be planting now, but you have to be willing to cover them if it frosts, just like a tomato. I like it. Here is a nut I put outdoors, planted it outdoors. There's where nature wants to be. Trees, nuts that were planted by a squirrel or a blue jay would be that big right now. They know not to leaf out until after the frost. We've forced them ahead, and a frost will kill this tree. I think this is a great trick. I really like these sheetrock buckets. I love this. You put that there, and you basically, it's in a hothouse. The wind won't hit it. Even a heavy rain or a hailstorm won't tip it over. I've actually got a little hole in this one to let the heat out. On a hot day, it can get awfully warm in there, but it's like a greenhouse. It works great. And then if you have a frost, you put something on top. That's why this doesn't work if you put one on the side. And then you put a rock on there. And I've planted a lot of trees early. Well, even if you plant them the beginning of June, if you get a couple of late frosts, I've got about 20 or 30 of these. You go put them on, and even if it's not a frost, when it's cold or windy, you want that seedling protected. I'm not going to be planting them for a couple of weeks here probably, but people that want to get started or think about it, that's a good little trick. Here's another thing, very widely recommended, to put a rodent guard around the tree. If you look here, I don't have a rodent guard, and I don't believe I've lost one tree to a rodent, to a mole or a vole or a... But if you take hardware cloth and cut it, and take your zip ties, still don't know where I put them, but anyways, you put a couple of zip ties to hold it, and you take this and you kind of work it down in. Now this would be ideally, you'd be back down to the soil. You do this before you pull the chips. It works pretty darn well. You do that and you kind of jiggle that in a little bit into the soil, and then you can pull your chips back around it. I can let go of that. I've done this. I've had them this tall. This wouldn't stop a turkey from reaching over and grabbing the nut, and it wouldn't keep a raccoon out. Knock on wood. I don't have much problem with varmints, but there's a lot of things that can happen to your tree. I actually put these all out on the deck 3 days ago, and I can't believe it. I forgot them. I showed you putting them out, and then I forgot them the end of the day. It had been windy, and they were feeling paper dry. I know I set them back, but they're good buds coming. There's one way to plant them. Another way, maybe I won't show you, but you can go right in the garden. In other words, you can put all your trees in your garden if you want, and the second year they're easy to move. So you can let them grow. By the end of the season, they should be this tall if they're happy. Remember to water these. I didn't bring that, but you know, right now I'd be putting most of a bucket, flood it right out, and then come back in 20 minutes and put some more, and then if you have a hot sunny day, water them. Keeping them watered the first season is very important. Get those roots going, then you don't have to water them again. Usually, although last summer was so dry, I did quite a lot of hose watering of these guys. So I guess I won't show you the next one, but I've got just a post hole digger, and you just go in the garden. Well, you can do it with a shovel, or you can just take your post hole digger and just dig a hole like that and set her down in. Sometimes you want a second person there while you hold it and they backfill. The trick is you don't want to, usually they hold together better than that one. This one was there, so here's one that spent the winter outside. I thought they'd certainly be dead, and they're all budded out. This thing's gonna take off like a rocket ship. And this one, knock on wood, that'll stay together fine. Look at this poor thing. Look at all these roots. Came to the edge, grew down right there. Look at those roots, big woody roots. So that's no trouble with that thing falling apart. That would be simple to plant. Can put that one right back together. This is a Jones orchard from Maine. Was planted March 30th last year, and we didn't find a home for a bunch of them, and we thought they'd be dead this spring, and most of them are alive. So once again, these trees want to grow. They really want to grow. They're ready to go. did I bring it? I meant to bring it. I got distracted. Funny, I was going to show you an oak tree that looks just about the same size. They're kind of fun to plant too. Once you get good at chestnuts, planting acorns is the same thing. Couple of these trees, if you take a look, right now, you know, they're getting the setting sun. This is leafing out beautifully. I think I might have showed you this before, but this is a pretty classic example. I dug this tree up in the woods. We're hoping, you know, Kendra said it's an American, a wild type American. We hope it is. And if I had to look, I'd almost say, well, I don't know whether that's blight or whether that's just, but anyways, there's the tree I planted 2 years ago. And here's the shoot, came just like a rocket ship right up here. It's passing this one. By the end of the year, this one will be up here, and this one will have either died or stalled out should you cut it off. Once again, the less cutting you do, the better, although it's a little tempting to nip that one off. I probably will. Oh yeah, I wanted to show you this. These are pretty cool. We went to central New Hampshire. Someday I'll send a video out to an incredible set of ghost trees that are still standing. They're almost unbelievable. I don't think there are many left anywhere. These are ones that died 100 years ago and they're still standing. A little hard to believe where they died. Well, a minimum of 1940, 50. A minimum of 70 years ago and they're still standing. And under them are lots of offspring. Old root sprouts, so we took a crew down, dug them up, and here's one of them, and here's another one. They don't look like much, but they're leafing out. I just planted them 2 days ago, and they haven't wilted. You know, it's brutal to go into the forest and chop these roots that are coming. And we had a good crew with sharp shovels, and we got nice forest duff out. Actually, I think I showed you that. And anyways, here it is. A few days later, I gave it a drink of water this morning. Try and remember to give it some more water. I expect this will probably send up a vigorous shoot. If there's enough living tissue down there, it's probably not going to be too happy, but it'll send up a shoot. And there's another one, which I will tie that up to help it a little bit. And so kind of bouncing around here on instructions, but I just thought I should pull the trigger and do it. Have fun with them. Like I say, you can put them in your garden and watch them grow all summer, put them this far apart, get nice bark chips around them, and then next spring, it's easy to dig up a 1-year-old tree. Very easy. You just pop it right out of the ground. You can put it wherever you want. 2-year-old tree is pretty hard. By 1-year tree, the taproot will be down here somewhere, and 2-year-old tree, you're not going to get it out of the ground. You're going to have to cut it off. But we've transplanted 3-year-old trees, and they do pretty well, although I'm not sure that we don't make them more susceptible to blight, all that trauma. So I'll try and get this in the mail to you, and good luck. Send questions.